All right, what's up, my friends? And welcome to this episode where we're going to talk about the fear of obsessing or the fear of getting anxious or even the fear of getting stuck in the OCD loop. So, one of the things that can happen with OCD and anxiety is that it will just manifest different obsessive thoughts and different fears that will just pop up, right? Different what if thoughts that are kind of continuously bombard us to get stuck in that loop. And one of the things that will happen is sometimes we'll have a theme that we get stuck on. Let's just use harm OCD in this instance, and then we actually start to understand the process, and we actually get out of that loop, right? And we understand eliminating the compulsions, and then what will happen is that the OCD and anxiety will come back and then start to say, well, what if I regress into that? Or what if I start having those thoughts again? What if I go to this party and I actually have an obsession? What if I go here and I get anxious? And it really starts to future pace this idea of what if I fall backwards or I have something happen that I can't handle. Right. And that's really where a lot of these fears come from, of the idea of what if I have an obsession, or what if I start obsessing about this, or what if I get caught in this loop. And so I want to address these questions as a whole in this episode, because they're very, 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 very common. And what I want to do is I want to really look at it from the broadest picture possible, because a lot of times people will say, like, this is such a difficult obsession because it's like essentially you're obsessing about obsessing, or you're having anxiety about getting anxiety, or you're afraid of getting afraid. And as you can imagine, if you get caught up in that, like, then everything you're looking at becomes scary, right? Like everything you're looking at becomes a potential danger, because I might have an obsession there. I might get anxious there. I might have a panic attack there. I might regress. I might fall back. And this is one of the lures that the OCD and anxiety uses, that it loves to hook people with. And so I want to really just, again, go high level here. So again, for those of you that don't know me, my name's Matt Cotty, and I'm a licensed clinical social worker and the founder of Restored Minds and the creator of the AAA Response. And so, for if you haven't, been a part of our community for any length of time now, please, subscribe, and join our Facebook group, and, join our lives, as well as, check us out over at restoredminds.com, because we have additional resources for you if you're struggling with this. Specifically, we have a free training that you can attend right away to really start to understand a bigger picture of this. So, but anyways, when it comes to this fear of obsessing or obsessing about obsessing, the number one thing that we want to understand is that it's just another lure that the OCD and anxiety uses. Meaning, I always use this analogy of the fisherman, right? And the fisherman throws these lures out, and these lures are always in the shape of a what if form. That's how it's OCD and anxiety, right? That's one of its biggest giveaways. Is that when you see a what if thought pop into your conscious awareness, what you need to understand is that voice of the mind, that fear voice, right? It's trying to suck your consciousness into that fear and anxiety, right? And what happens is that when that fear voice, how it gets you is to create these what if thoughts. So instead of addressing these individually, right, what I want you to understand is that this is to be expected. Because when you start winning the battle against OCD and anxiety, it's not going to go quietly into the night. And this is one of the number one things it's going to try to hook you with, is this idea of like, well, what if I start obsessing again? What if I get anxious again? What if I fall back into the loop again? Then what, right? And it creates these kind of futuristic dread ideas. And then you start getting hooked on that, and then starting to neutralize that becomes the compulsion you're doing, right? So you start to try to figure out what you would do in certain scenarios, or reassure yourself, or all that other stuff you see, like, and that's how tricky it is. And that's really what I want to point out in this episode, is just how tricky the OCD and anxiety can be, because it can start, with a certain theme, and then it goes to, well, what if I change themes? What if I have a panic attack here and I don't know what to do? And the thing that I want to come back to again and again with this is that you've always been able to handle right now. What makes OCD and anxiety difficult is that it always goes into the future or the past, And so we're always trying to solve something that doesn't currently exist. But the reality is you've always been able to handle right now. Don't believe me? Like, you're here. You've always been able to handle every now that's happened before this. It might have been tough. It might have been stressful, but you were able to handle it. You got through it. Okay. And when it comes to the idea of obsessing about obsessing, or obsessing that you may get anxious, or obsessing about regressing, any of those, okay, what you need to understand is that the OCD is just trying to hook you again with that. And because it starts with the what if, again, you got to use the techniques to make sure you don't get in that conversation. Now, at Restored Minds, we teach AAA response for that, right? Like, that is our bread and butter foundation of everything we do, right? Just to make sure you're not engaging in those what if thoughts, because the moment you get in the conversation, you've already assumed that the content of what your mind is producing is the problem. And that is the number one problem with anxiety. Whatever we're anxious about, whatever we're obsessing about, is never the actual problem. The problem is the loop that we get in about that. And that shift is so important to understand on this journey, because so many times we get so caught up in the content about what we're obsessing about and thinking that is the problem we need to solve. Where really the problem is always the loop that we get stuck in. And the reason we get stuck is because those four components exist. You have the thought, right? Usually starting with a what if, and then you have the anxiety or the distress or the guilt or the feeling that you get. And then you have the safety behavior that you perform, which again is usually a mental behavior in this instance. Okay. So this is important that we understand this, right? And then we'll talk more about safety behaviors on this series, especially the mental ones. But usually those mental safety behaviors are the things that we're looking at, right? And then it's the relief that you experience from the safety behavior. So common mental safety behaviors, right? Analyzing, worrying, trying to solve something, ruminating about something, thought blocking, thought suppression, silent prayer, right? All that stuff is really where that's what fuels that cycle. And then not to mention all the physical things we do, like avoidance, checking, controlling, and reassurance. So what we need to understand is that the problem we have is that loop, and that the fisherman's going to try all these different lures to hook us. And those lures are going to start with a what if. And so even if the lures might be images in some instances, and that's okay too, right? Same thing, right? Those intrusive thoughts are the images, and everything we do to try to get rid of them or neutralize those lures are actually the behaviors that we're doing. And so so when we're worrying about obsessing, or we're worrying about having anxiety, or we're worrying about relapsing, kind of those three things, right? Because they're all really the same thing, right? It's really this idea of, what if something happens in the future that I can't handle? That's kind of the overarching theme of those obsessions, right? And it's this idea that, like, look, you know what? Cross that bridge when I need to. I'm just here right now, and bringing yourself back to now. The moment you try to go and solve the future, that's when you got stuck. Okay. So just understanding that. And again, having the grace with yourself to understand that this is a process. This is not easy. Okay. What I'm saying is maybe simple to understand, but it's not easy to do in the moment, because it's going to feel real. It's going to feel very intense. And so just understanding the reason I'm not going into validating these as real things, like, sure, is it possible that you might feel anxious in the future? Yeah. You know what? Anything's possible. Okay. But if we're trying to solve that problem now, there's nothing to solve. It's not happening right now. And in many ways, what we're doing is we're creating suffering right now by worrying about the future. That's really what anxiety is. It's a form of suffering, and in many ways, needless suffering. And it took me a very, very long time to understand this on my journey. I mean, I invested years in worrying about stuff, right? And analyzing stuff and all that, So really, that's the kind of message that I want to, really conclude this episode with, is just this idea that any of those thoughts, right, those are just extra lures, and you need to do the same thing, right? Use a AAA response, or, use whatever techniques you use to make sure you don't engage in the mental compulsions, because that is really the point right there of the process. Is not to get focused on what you're obsessing about. It's just understanding the wheel, and understanding that obsessing and that wheel is actually the problem you're dealing with. And when you can make that one shift, then it really doesn't matter what lure the OCD throws or the anxiety throws, right? It's just about understanding that my job is not to get caught up in what lure it throws. It's that I don't want to get caught in the wheel. That's the goal. That's the goal. Okay. So hopefully that was helpful, and hopefully that, makes sense. And what I want to do is I want to field a few questions here, right? Because this being a live. And so with that said, we have some links down below in the description where you can go on and head over to Restored Minds, and you can access our free training and downloads to start helping you on this journey, as well as some of our additional services in our programs and coaching services. So thank you so much for hanging out today. And now what I want to do is I want to shift over into some questions. So thank you so much for watching that video. And so if you're struggling with OCD and anxiety, I just wanted to let you know that we have a free training for you over at Restored Minds, where you can start learning how to use our AAA response to really break out of that loop and ultimately take back control of your life. And all you need to do to access is just click the little link below, and you'll be taken to a page where you can register today. Thank you so much.